Today is Mark 6:30 to 34 and Mark 53 to 56. The apostles came back to Jesus and reported all that they had done and taught. Jesus said to them, "Come away by yourselves to some place more remote and rest a while." For there were many people coming and going, and the apostles hadn't had time to eat. So they went away in a boat to a deserted area. The people saw them leaving, and many recognized them. So they ran together on foot from all the cities and got there ahead of the apostles. When Jesus went ashore, there was a large crowd waiting for him, and he felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. Verses 53 to 56. After crossing the lake, Jesus and the disciples came ashore at Gennesaret and tied up their boat there. No sooner had they stepped out of the boat than people recognized Jesus. The crowd had started hurrying about the countryside and brought the sick on stretchers wherever Jesus went. Wherever he appeared, in villages and towns or in the countryside, they laid down the sick in open places, begging him to let them touch just the fringe of his cloak. And all who touched Jesus got well. And so now Julie will tell us about her experience.
I actually decided to switch gears a little bit this morning. So if you want to hear more about my pilgrimage experience and Idaho's own Indigenous history, please stay afterwards, and I'll be sharing more about that then. But the scripture today kind of took me in a little bit different direction, and maybe the rambling workings of my mind can somehow weave it all together. First of all, let me just say that I am not very good at preaching yet, so I am pretty good at reading. I might just read at you. Forgive me. And also, I did this last time. I'm going to do it again. I'm too tall on those. Okay. Next time, we'll just wear flip-flops. I don't know. I haven't learned yet. I've been learning a lot about repair lately. Repair with the land, our fellow humans, our creator, and also ourselves. Repair calls us to shift our perspective from one of independence to interdependence. And that's something, a theme that stood out to me in today's scripture as well. Even Jesus at some point was like, "Y'all, we need a break." And I don't think we often give ourselves that permission to rest. So we're going to maybe explore that a little bit this morning in relationship with interdependence and community. But let's talk about that first, interdependence versus independence. America was literally built upon the paradigm of independence, which most Americans have been taught to venerate as the highest ideal. Interdependence is not only a foreign concept in Western society, but is intentionally framed as contemptible. Becoming open and curious about the concept of interdependence may be intimidating and frightening for many Americans, and yet it is the necessary starting point for meaningful work in repair. In her book, Becoming Kin, Patty Krawick posits that cultures revolve around the center of their creation stories. Christian-based cultures view their creation story through a lens of disconnection and fear. Humans were expelled from the Garden of Eden and made to wander across the land. They had to battle with the land and with other people for their survival. The most aggressive becomes the victor and gets to live another day. From the very beginning of this creation story, we are taught that struggle is the foundation of human existence and that violence is necessary to survival. We are taught through this narrative that we live in an us against them world, and that independence is not only the prime objective, but the greatest show of strength. Bearing this creation center in mind, white settlers viewed the indigenous people as their competition and the land as their prize, idealizing conquest and dominion, emboldened by a theology that placed Christians at the pinnacle of creation. That could only lead exactly where it did. First, genocide and segregation, then assimilation and the disappearing of indigenous cultures, followed by the whitewashing of history. Even when tribes were granted land, it was expected that they would live and farm on it the way white settlers did. Boarding schools were then introduced as a means of civilizing Indians, and there was no recognition of the value of any other kind of society. There was no room for learning about or exploring any other way of doing life. Interdependence was regarded as weak, and independence was hailed as the supreme goal. This is reinforced by the notion that Indians were not even competent to govern themselves. They were not worthy of their own independence from the United States, and therefore they must remain wards of the state. Interdependence continues to be perceived as weakness. Socialism is viewed by many in the United States as evil, or at the very least inferior to capitalism. But we seem to be missing entirely the living lesson that is creation. Nothing in creation exists in solitude. Everything and everyone is interconnected and interwoven into the fabric of life that is this planet. This planet can do without human beings. In fact, it would probably thrive without us. But we cannot live without creation's provisions. We are utterly dependent. This is not just our home, it is our life support. Indigenous cultures seem to understand this much more readily than Western cultures ever have. This disconnect in how different peoples have understood their place in the world has historically led to great conflict, and continues to do so both culturally and spiritually. However, peace is not the absence of war or conflict. Rather, it is living into right relationship. Any effort at repair must center our relationship with our fellow human beings, our land, ourselves, and indeed all of creation. The question is not, how do I heal my relationship with other people? Rather, how do we heal together? The first step is always learning, and we're going to do some more in-depth intentional learning together about our colonial history after service, if you want to stay for that. But right now I want to talk to you about the how and why of intentional interdependence, and that brings me back to today's scripture. In this passage, we see that Jesus and his disciples were weary from their work, and I think all of us can relate to that. They've been focused on the good news to the point that they've neglected their own basic personal care in their efforts to care for their community. So Jesus is like, hey, let's get on a boat, let's get a snack, let's take a break, get some R&R. But they are detected, people see them and follow them, and Jesus' response, as always, is compassion, care, and healing. The scripture tells us Jesus does his heavenly duty. He responds to the people and he heals the sick. But what we don't hear about as much as what the disciples were doing. It seems they're off the hook. Are they allowed to sneak off while Jesus meets the masses? I hope so. I can't help but think that that is the greatest gift of healing that Jesus has to offer us in this passage. That he takes the load off of someone else, namely his disciples. They're overworked and underfed. They're exhausted and they just need a break. And Jesus gives them permission to take one. I don't know about you, but I am nearly incapable of giving myself a break until I am so exhausted that I can't physically get out of bed, and I sleep for a day, and then I'm right back at it. I have several people that I'm responsible for, so there's always that as my excuse. I have a couple of jobs which I've committed to, and a community that I feel I owe my service to. So of course I'm busy, and as you can see, that's entirely justified. Why is it so very hard for me to rest? I'm starting to wonder how much of that is by choice. Certainly life has obligations that must be met, but how much do I do because I think I'm supposed to, because I think it's expected of me, because independence is the goal and I have to strive for that? How much of what I do is actually blessed, meaning what God hopes for me? Mennonites are very good at taking care of each other, and this is a beautiful thing. But I think sometimes we are not as good at taking care of ourselves. For some reason, we feel like it's selfish or vain or unnecessary. And I feel that way right now. I literally feel guilty in this moment telling you that I am not capable of doing it all. I cannot be everything to everyone all of the time, and yet I persist in trying. And I think that's pride. I think I feel like I have something to prove to the world, to you, and to myself. That need to prove myself and to be acknowledged in that way, that is my pride. And it's hurting me. I know I can't be the only one who feels this way. So how do we stop that? And what does this have to do with repair? It seems like the disciples couldn't do that on their own. They needed Jesus to make them take a break, to give them permission, to remind them that the work is not the goal, the relationship is. That everyone is better off when each one of us is well cared for. We talk a lot these days about self-care, but what does that really mean in the context of justice work and community? When we're so committed to the whole that we neglect our own care, I don't think that's what God intends for us. It's certainly not how Jesus treated his disciples, and it's not the lesson we learn from our Indigenous brothers and sisters who have demonstrated cooperation and right relationship with creation. Interdependence is the lesson. I have to learn to trust you, and you have to learn to trust me. To trust that when you tell me you've got me, I actually believe that you've got me, and I let you. None of us were meant to carry our load alone, and yet we think we are stronger for trying. And to what end? To proving that I can do it by myself? Because I don't want to put you out? Because I feel shame in asking for help? So I feel like I have to do life on my own because independence is the epitome of a successful life, right? But what if I'm wrong and the mark of a successful life is how well I do life in community with you? What if success is measured by how well we take care of each other and all of creation together? What if we're graded in life based on the group project, not the independent exam?